A brief pause in the carefully orchestrated program sent a ripple of anticipation throughout the ballroom. The MC, whose voice had grown thick with emotion from the tales of fallen soldiers, cleared his throat and scanned the room with a solemn gaze. "Tonight," he announced, his voice echoing in the hushed space, "we have a very special guest. A man who has seen more than most of us could ever imagine and lived to tell about it." Almost immediately, a shift in the room's energy was palpable. Conversations ceased mid-sentence. Champagne glasses were gently set aside on linen-draped tables, and even President Trump leaned forward slightly in his seat, his attention intensifying. The general continued with measured reverence. Sergeant Lucas Barrett served 2 tours in Iraq and 1 in Afghanistan. Awarded the Purple Heart for injuries sustained during an ambush outside Kandahar, he carries not only the scars of battle, but the stories of those who never returned home. His voice softened. What he is about to share with us tonight goes beyond the battlefield. Please join me in giving a warm welcome to a true American hero. A respectful, albeit subdued, applause began to ripple across the room as a tall, broad-shouldered man in his late 50s made his way toward the stage. Despite the crisp navy-blued suit he wore, there was an undeniable air of vulnerability in his measured, deliberate movements. A slight limp that hinted at the injuries that had once nearly claimed his life. This was Lucas Barrett, a man whose years of service and sacrifice were etched into every line of his weathered face. Lucas Barrett stepped confidently onto the stage and approached the microphone with a calm determination. He cleared his throat, adjusted the microphone stand with practiced ease, and allowed his eyes to wander over the assembled dignitaries, senators, CEOs, Hollywood stars, and longtime friends of the military. The room, despite its opulence, sensed the gravity of the moment. This was not the usual pomp of a gala. This was a gathering of hearts ready to remember, to feel, to honor. "I want to thank you all for being here tonight," Lucas began, his voice resonant yet gentle. "We are here to raise money, to show support, and to stand in solidarity with the men and women who have sacrificed so much. But I also know that too often we forget what those sacrifices truly mean." His gaze swept slowly across the crowd until it rested on President Trump, whose eyes were locked onto him in earnest attention. Lucas paused, his fingers curling slightly around the microphone stand, as if bracing himself for the weight of the words he was about to speak. "I don't say this with bitterness," he continued, "but I say it because I have seen the toll of war on the human soul. I have seen what it takes from a man, the loss of friends, the shattering of innocence, and the burden of memories that never fade." His voice grew softer yet more determined. "There was a night, in a hospital bed with more broken bones than I can count, when I didn't know how I could possibly carry on. In that moment, I did the only thing I could do. I wrote a song." A murmur spread through the audience, a mixture of surprise and intrigue. A song? Here? In the midst of political and corporate elites? A battle-hardened soldier was about to share a deeply personal creation? "This song isn't about me," Lucas quickly clarified, shaking his head as if to dispel any notion of self-aggrandizement. "It's for the ones who never got the chance to stand on a stage like this. It's for the young men who never made it home, for the brothers and sisters who fought alongside me but now live only in our memories." From his pocket, Lucas withdrew a small, creased piece of paper, the edges worn and softened by countless unfoldings and refoldings. "I wrote these words for them," he said softly, "and tonight I want to share it with you." At that cue, a pianist positioned in the corner of the room struck a soft, mournful chord. The sound reverberated gently through the ballroom, its notes mingling with the hushed breaths of anticipation. Lucas closed his eyes, took a measured breath, and began to sing. His voice, deep and soulful, carried through the room with a weight that made every ear stop and every heart listen. The lyrics were raw, poignant, and steeped in the sorrow of loss, a tribute to those who had paid the ultimate price. The melody, delicate and haunting, seemed to suspend time itself. Even the flickering light of the chandeliers softened in deference to the emotion filling the space. As he sang, it felt as though the entire room was caught in a collective embrace of grief and honor. One by one, many in the audience fought back tears, their expressions softening with empathy. When Lucas reached the final, lingering note, a silence fell. A silence that was not empty, but filled with the echo of every sacrifice that had led to that moment. Then, as if a spell had been broken, applause erupted. But it was no ordinary applause. It was a thunderous, heartfelt ovation that began as gentle clapping and grew into a standing ovation. People rose from their seats, some embraced their neighbors, while others simply let the emotion wash over them. The sound was pure, sincere, and as vibrant as the music that had just filled the air. Amidst the roar of the audience, one figure remained noticeably still. President Donald Trump, who had been watching intently from his seat at the head table, had not risen or clapped along with the crowd. His hands, tightly clasped on the table, remained motionless, as if he were weighing the profound words and the raw emotion that had just been shared. Then, slowly and deliberately, he stood. The sudden motion caught everyone's attention. In a room filled with the usual rehearsed smiles and measured applause, this was something entirely different. The guests watched in stunned silence as Trump, with a gaze that was uncharacteristically vulnerable, made his way from his seat toward the stage. His steps were measured, each one laden with significance. Cameras flashed, capturing every moment, but the focus was not on the spectacle. It was on the unfolding of a moment of deep connection. As he ascended the steps, the murmur of the crowd quieted even further, replaced by a collective intake of breath. When he reached the stage, he paused just a few feet away from Lucas Barrett. For a moment, the two men stood facing each other, the embodiment of different worlds. One a battle-hardened veteran bearing the physical and emotional scars of combat, the other a former president known for his unyielding persona, now showing a side seldom seen in public. Then, with a quiet resolve, Trump extended his hand. Lucas hesitated only for a heartbeat before grasping it. The handshake that followed was more than a formality. It was a lingering, profound connection, a silent acknowledgement of shared sacrifice and the cost of freedom. Trump's other hand then moved to rest on Lucas's shoulder in a gesture that transcended political divides and spoke directly to the heart. The room was silent, the usual clamor of the gala replaced by an almost palpable reverence. Cameras captured every detail: the firmness of the handshake, the unspoken communication in their eyes, the solemn nod that passed between them. Finally, with his voice soft but clear enough for the microphone to catch, Trump spoke. "They'll never be forgotten." At those simple words, something shifted in the room. Lucas's eyes welled briefly with emotion, and he nodded in understanding. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then, as if releasing the tension that had built up over years of neglect and sorrow, Trump stepped back and clapped. A slow, deliberate clap that soon joined with the roaring ovation of the rest of the audience. It was no longer just a show of appreciation for a performance. It was a tribute, a promise, a call to honor every fallen hero. In the aftermath of the public display, as the applause began to subside and the event moved forward, Trump did something unexpected. As Lucas Barrett stepped down from the stage, feeling both the weight of the night's emotions and the solace of shared remembrance, he felt a firm hand on his arm. Turning slightly, he saw Trump leaning in, his eyes sharp and intent. "Walk with me," the president said softly, his voice low yet unmistakable in its sincerity. There was no showmanship in the request, only a need for a private conversation, away from the stage, the cameras, and the scripted speeches. Lucas hesitated just a moment longer, then nodded, allowing himself to be led toward the edge of the ballroom. A small group of aides and Secret Service agents quickly formed a discreet perimeter, ensuring that while the world outside continued its celebrations, here in this quiet corner, a more personal dialogue could unfold. In hushed tones, away from the prying eyes of the media, Trump and Lucas began to talk. Trump's eyes, usually so accustomed to the glare of spotlights and cameras, now shone with a quiet intensity. "That song," he said slowly, as if choosing his words with great care, "wasn't just music. It was the truth." Lucas, still catching his breath from the emotional performance, simply replied, "It was the truth." Trump's gaze hardened as he continued, "I've met a lot of veterans over the years, heard countless stories of sacrifice, but I've never heard it expressed so beautifully, so honestly." He paused, as though the weight of his own memories gave him pause. "You served in Afghanistan, didn't you?" he asked quietly. Lucas shifted his weight, the memory of battles long past surfacing in his mind. "Yes, sir, 2 tours," he replied, his voice even despite the emotion behind it. "The first time I left, I was barely 22. The second time, that's when I got hit." The simplicity of his words belied the tumult of pain and resilience behind them. Trump nodded slowly, his expression softening. "Do you still keep in touch with any of your comrades, the ones who made it home?" he inquired, as though probing for a glimpse into a past that few spoke of openly. Lucas's jaw tightened slightly, the mention stirring both pride and sorrow. "Some of them, yes. Too many didn't make it," he said quietly. A heavy silence fell over the 2 men, filled with the echoes of loss and the cost of duty. After a few measured seconds, Trump spoke again, his tone resolute. "You know, I get criticized a lot. People say I don't understand the military, that I don't know what sacrifice really means. Maybe they're right in some ways, but tonight, I listened. I heard you, Lucas." He looked directly into Lucas's eyes, as though trying to imprint the moment into his very soul. "This song, your song, needs to be heard by every veteran, by every person who has lost someone. We can't let their stories fade away." Trump then turned to one of his aides. "Make sure this is shared far and wide. Every veteran in this country must hear it." Lucas's heart pounded as he absorbed the president's words. The conversation, so intimate and sincere, went far beyond the usual protocol of public events. It was a promise that echoed with the shared understanding of sacrifice and the deep-seated need to honor those who had given everything. Later that night, as the gala resumed its carefully planned schedule, the buzz of the earlier moments lingered like an afterimage. Guests whispered among themselves, and in the corridors outside the ballroom, discreet conversations spoke of the extraordinary connection between the soldier and the president. And when the event finally came to an end, the story had already begun to spread, fueled by countless video clips, social media posts, and impassioned news reports. Social media posts and impassioned news reports. In the hours and days that followed, Lucas Barrett's tribute and the president's heartfelt reaction ignited a firestorm of discussion across the country. Clips of the performance, of the handshake, and of Trump's solemn words were shared widely on social media. Headlines spoke of a rare emotional moment for a president known more for his bombast than for tenderness, while countless emails, texts, and phone calls poured in from veterans and families alike. For many, the video was a revelation, a reminder that even the highest offices could bend in the face of true human sacrifice. A young soldier from Oklahoma, grieving the loss of his brother, wrote, Your song gave me a piece of my brother back." In Texas, a former servicewoman who had felt invisible after returning home found solace in the music and the authenticity behind it. In Ohio, a father who had once folded the flag over his fallen son's coffin received a message that said, "I needed to hear that. Thank you for speaking our truth." But the impact went far beyond individual messages. Across news channels, talk shows, and online forums, the story of that night became a rallying cry for greater support for veterans. Policy experts and community leaders debated how to better honor those who had served, while grassroots organizations found new momentum in their mission to provide mental health support, job training, and housing for returning soldiers. In many ways, the song had transcended its musical form. It had become a symbol of a larger movement, a movement that demanded that no veteran be forgotten. For Lucas Barrett, the days after the gala were a whirlwind of emotions and unexpected opportunities. His phone buzzed relentlessly with calls and messages, not from journalists or politicians, but from veterans, families, and even strangers who had been touched by his performance. One message, from a woman named Marjorie Tillman, the mother of Private Jason Tillman, a young soldier from Lucas's unit who never returned, stood out. "I never got to hear my son's voice again," it read. "But last night, in your song, I felt him beside me." Lucas's fingers trembled as he typed back a simple, heartfelt reply. "He's never been forgotten." That message became a turning point for Lucas. It was not the end of a story, but the beginning of a new chapter. A chapter where he would carry on the legacy of those lost by helping others share their own stories. Motivated by the outpouring of support and the realization that his song had given countless people hope, Lucas reached out to a small nonprofit dedicated to helping veterans use music and storytelling as a means of healing. He began to work with them not as a celebrity or a figurehead, but as one of their own. A man who had borne the burden of loss and was now determined to help others bear theirs. In the months that followed, the story of that unforgettable night continued to ripple across the nation. The video of Lucas Barrett's performance and President Trump's impassioned response was viewed by millions. Veteran organizations reported record numbers of inquiries and new supporters. Communities organized tribute concerts, memorial events, and fundraising drives, all inspired by the raw honesty of one soldier's tribute. For Lucas, the transformation was as personal as it was public. No longer did he see himself solely as a veteran haunted by the past. He now embraced the role of a storyteller and an advocate. He began visiting schools, community centers, and even military bases, sharing his journey and urging listeners to remember that every sacrifice had a face, a name, and a story. His message was simple yet profound. Honor the fallen by ensuring that the living never forget. At one such event, held at a local community center in a small Californian town, Lucas stood before an audience of veterans, family members, and local leaders. The room was intimate compared to the grandeur of the Beverly Wilshire Hotel, yet the energy was no less electric. He spoke with a quiet passion about his own struggles, the nightmares that visited him in the dead of night, the isolation he felt upon returning home, and the burden of memories that had once seemed too heavy to bear. But he also spoke of hope, of the small moments that could change a life, and of the promise that every soldier deserved dignity and care. In his closing words, Lucas said, "No matter how far we stray from the battlefields, the echoes of our sacrifice remain. They live in our memories, our struggles, and in the bonds we forge with one another. Let us honor them by ensuring that their stories are never lost. Let us fight, together, for every soldier, for every veteran, for every hero who has given everything." That night, as he looked out over a sea of nodding heads and tearful eyes, Lucas knew that the song he had sung at the gala was only the beginning. It had sparked a movement fueled by empathy, determination, and the shared belief that every sacrifice deserved recognition. Back in Washington, D.C., where the corridors of power were often cold and impersonal, the memory of that night reverberated in unexpected ways. In an impromptu meeting of veteran advocacy groups and lawmakers, the footage of Trump's handshake with Lucas Barrett was shown on a large screen. For many in that room, the image of the former president, his face softened by genuine emotion, was a stark reminder that even the most polarizing figures could change when confronted with undeniable truth. Legislators and community leaders began to engage in earnest discussions about reforming veteran care policies. The conversation was not merely about increasing funding, it was about transforming the very approach to how veterans were treated. Stories of neglect and abandonment, once relegated to the margins of policy debates, were now front and center. It was a reckoning, a call to action that demanded that no hero be left to fade into obscurity. In these meetings, one sentiment emerged clearly: the need to bridge the gap between the sacrifices of the past and the care provided in the present. Proposals ranged from improved mental health services and job retraining programs to comprehensive housing initiatives specifically designed for veterans. And at the heart of it all was the unyielding belief that every voice mattered, a belief that had been powerfully embodied by Lucas Barrett's song. As spring blossomed in Los Angeles and across the nation, the legacy of that extraordinary night continued to grow. The story of a veteran's tribute and a president's rare moment of vulnerability became a touchstone, a symbol of hope that transcended partisan lines and reached deep into the heart of what it meant to honor those who had sacrificed. For Lucas Barrett, life had taken on new meaning. His days were no longer marked solely by the echoes of war, but by the fulfillment of knowing that he was helping others find their voices. He worked tirelessly with veteran organizations, participated in community outreach programs, and even collaborated on a documentary that chronicled the journeys of soldiers returning from conflict. The project, which featured interviews, archival footage, and personal testimonies, sought to capture not only the pain of loss, but the resilience of the human spirit. In quiet moments, Lucas would reflect on that fateful night. The soft strain of the piano, the heavy silence that followed his final note, and the unmistakable emotion in President Trump's eyes as he said, "They'll never be forgotten." Those memories became his compass, guiding him to advocate for change, to ensure that every veteran had the opportunity to heal and rebuild. And as the movement gained momentum, stories began to emerge from all corners of the country. Veterans who had long suffered in silence found the courage to share their experiences. Families, too, began to speak openly about the losses that had defined their lives, and communities rallied to support initiatives that promised real, lasting change. In every conversation, every shared memory, there was a single, unifying truth: no sacrifice should ever be forgotten. Years later, at another gala, this time held at a modest community center in a small town, Lucas Barrett took the stage once more. Though the room was smaller than the grand ballroom of the Beverly Wilshire Hotel, the audience was no less passionate. Veterans, family members, and local dignitaries gathered to celebrate progress, a progress that had been hard-won through countless acts of courage and compassion. As Lucas began to speak about the strides that had been made in veteran support and care, his eyes shone with the light of someone who had known despair, but had also witnessed redemption. "We owe it to those who never came home to fight for those who remain," he said, his voice strong and unwavering. "We must honor our past by forging a future where every sacrifice is remembered and every veteran is given the respect and care they deserve." The applause that followed was thunderous, not simply for the eloquence of his words, but for the promise of a better tomorrow. In that moment, the legacy of that unforgettable night was carried forward by a generation determined to make a difference. As the sun set over Los Angeles on yet another cool evening, the memories of that extraordinary night remained alive in the hearts of all who had been touched by it. President Trump's unexpected gesture of compassion, Lucas Barrett's soul-stirring tribute, and the outpouring of support from veterans and citizens alike had forged a bond, a promise that every soldier's sacrifice would be honored and remembered. In quiet moments of reflection, Lucas often thought back to that night. He remembered the hush that fell over the ballroom as he sang, the raw emotion in every note, and the way the room had come alive with empathy and remembrance. And he remembered the look on President Trump's face, a look that had conveyed more than words ever could. The realization that no matter one's station in life, the price of freedom was paid in blood, sweat, and tears, and that it was the duty of every American to ensure that no hero was ever forgotten. For those who had heard the story, it became a call to action. Every shared post, every conversation sparked by the tribute, and every new initiative to support veterans was a reminder that the true measure of a society was found in how it treated its most vulnerable. And as the movement continued to grow, the message remained clear. Honor the fallen, care for the survivors, and never let their voices fade away into silence. In the end, the story of that night was not merely about a song or a handshake. It was about the power of empathy to break down walls and the strength found in unity. It was a reminder that sometimes, even the most unlikely of moments, a heartfelt performance at a gala, a president's uncharacteristic act of tenderness, can spark change that resonates far beyond the confines of a single event. Lucas Barrett's tribute became a symbol, a beacon for all those who had suffered loss in silence, and a rallying cry for every veteran who had been left behind. And as news of that moment spread across the country, it ignited a movement that would continue to push for reforms, greater accountability, and a renewed commitment to honoring those who had given everything. For President Trump, that night served as a moment of quiet introspection, a reminder that leadership sometimes meant setting aside pride and politics to address the real, human costs of conflict. And for countless others, the image of a man in a suit pausing to extend his hand to a battle-scarred veteran became an enduring symbol of hope, a promise that no sacrifice would ever be forgotten. As we move forward, let this story serve as a powerful reminder. Every voice matters, every sacrifice counts, and the legacy of our heroes is built not on grand gestures alone, but on the quiet, persistent work of remembering and caring for those who gave their all. If this story moved you, share it with others. Stand with our veterans, and let us all work together to ensure that the truth, the sacrifice, and the courage of every soldier live on in our hearts and in our actions.